Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Thomas Burr. I'm the Washington correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune and the 109th president of the National Press Club. Our guest today is Paul Wiedefeld, General Manager and CEO of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or as we often call it, Metro, or in less happy times, choice words I will not use from this stage. We'll get to those issues soon. I would like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences, and I want to remind you can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLive. That's hashtag NPCLive. Now it's time to introduce our head table guest. I ask that each of you stand briefly as your name is announced. Please hold your applause until I have finished introducing the entire table. From your right, David Shepperton, transportation reporter at Reuters. Martin DeCaro, transportation reporter at WAMU. John Doman, freelance radio reporter. Talia Schmidt, editor at Families USA. Bruce Johnson, news anchor at WUSA. Dan Stessel, the director of communications at Metro. Marcia Wiedefeld, the wife of our speaker. Angela Greiling Keene of Bloomberg News, a past NPC president and vice chair of the Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Pat Host, a reporter for Defense Daily and the member of the Speakers Committee who organized today's luncheon. Chuck Bean, the executive director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Dan Wagen, chairman of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Paula Reed, a justice reporter at CBS News. And Firdos Al-Farouk, a reporter of the Gray Sheet and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Thank you. A fatality during a smoke-related incident, physical attacks on passengers, derailments, a drop in ridership, and other worrisome events might be what keeps our guest, Mita Wiedefeld, up at night. But a new fare card system, communication improvements for first responders and passengers, and work with vendors to develop a real-time smartphone app surely make the days more exciting for the new general manager and CEO of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. Hired in November, Mr. Wiedefeld's career has been in public and private sector transit. Previously, he was the CEO of Baltimore, Washington Thurgood Marshall International Airport. He is credited with leading BWI's growth as the busiest passenger airport of the 3 airports in the Metro Washington region. Now his attention is on the country's second busiest subway system in the United States and a citywide bus system. 40 years after the first Metro rail car ferried area residents to work and tourists to sites, today's riders experience unpredictable travel times and must budget more time to reach their destination. Rail on-time performance, which measures how evenly spaced the trains are, has been consistently below target, particularly since the opening of the Silver Line. Ongoing track work outside of rush hour hobbles the system. Maintenance challenges, including broken elevators and escalators, creates more distress for passengers, especially for those in wheelchairs or on crutches. Mr. Wiedefeld rides the Metro to work from Union Station and has witnessed the frustration of extra time added when the escalator isn't working or the annoyance when the announcements are garbled. In addition to safety and maintenance issues, Mr. Wiedefeld will usher Metro through a critical period. Union contract negotiations are scheduled to begin this summer. Please welcome to the National Press Club stage, Washington Area Metropolitan Transit Agency General Manager and CEO, Paul Wiedefeld. Thank you for joining us today, sir. My first question, you've been in office for about 3 months now, and clearly there are a barrage of issues facing the nation's second busiest transportation system. How are you going to tackle and actually solve the problems facing Metro?
That's all?
That's it.
Okay. Very good.
Easy question.
If I could, before starting there, I did want to introduce some of my board members that are here because they are so important. Moore Downey's here, Michael Goldman, Malcolm Augustine, and Leif Dormshow, I think is over there from Washington, D.C. And most important, I'd like to introduce the first person I met at Metro, which is my station manager, Ms. Odom, right there. Hi, Ms. Odom. Nice to see you. My first day on the job, she was, I got to meet her and got to understand her
uniform
world.
Too.
Yeah, she's a good worker. All right. Rephrase the question?
I'm wondering your observations and your plan. You've been in office 3 months. There's a lot of problems that face this metro. From the things I started out talking about, broken escalators and elevators, the funding issues, and problems with incidents that have led to deaths in the past on metro. How are you going to tackle them, and how are you going to solve them?
Right. The first thing I did on coming on board in November 30th is I spent the whole month of December basically reaching out to stakeholders to understand those issues a little bit better. And meaning stakeholders, everything from my line employees all the way up to leaders of business, elected officials, and the riders to give me a feel for that. At the same time, we started in December and in January in particular, we had a number of outside consultants come in to help us sort of get our arms around some of these issues. And then my own assessment, based on my experiences in different positions. And I really got a good flavor of it during the blizzard, when I got a good sense of just operationally some of the things that we were dealing with. From the start, my priorities have been around safety, service reliability, and getting the fiscal management in order. Just today, we started to roll out some of the specific initiatives we're doing on those 3 areas. I'll get into them further, but it starts with me and getting the entire organization to understand those priorities, to start to organize, to deal with these issues in an efficient way, and to get particularly the line people, the operators, the station managers, the mechanics, to understand what we're up against and to get their support, and to work from that end up with our supervisors and superintendents, because that's a lot of where these issues get determined, and particularly from a customer's perspective. So I'm focusing on that. At the same time, I'm focusing on the overall management level, the executive management team as well. So that's how we're starting the process, and I can get into lots of specifics on those, as I'm sure you got other questions about them, specific issues.
Sure, well, let's address the first one that comes to mind. You had an op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday kind of laying some of this stuff out. But riders have seen people come before with promises, and these promises sometimes take years or never get done. How is this going to happen? How fast is this going to happen?
Right. My approach is, again, starting really nuts and bolts, and not so much some of maybe the larger things that we've tried to frame in the past. To me, when I look at particularly service reliability, for instance, it's fairly simple. It's the cars, it's the vehicles, meeting the line every day, AM and PM, and then obviously midday. It is the track, and it's the operations, meaning operators, station managers. So I've set up 3 separate teams with champions on each one of those. We meet weekly on what they're doing, what the plan is, and what we're doing to achieve it. And what I found in each one of those categories, to be frank, it's probably, it's much worse than I expected, and maybe even publicly we've been talking about. So we've got to clearly go right at those issues. We have issues, for instance, in the cars. A lot of the debate and the discussion over time has been about parts. That's only one part of it. It's everything from how we move the cars in the yard. It's everything from how we're efficiently programming work, using our employees most efficiently. So I have a whole team just working on that issue. On the track issue, same thing. When you take a look at our track issue and the work that we've been doing, when you start to peel it away, we have 30 very sharp curves in this system. And so that's got to be our first priority, because that leads to a lot of our issues. But it's not only just fixing what we see, but it's thinking much more holistically about what we do. So for instance, on the track work, we have a lot of fasteners we have to replace. They're aged and broken or whatever they're doing. What I found, I went out with my head engineer and CEO on the rail side. When I went out there and looked, in the tunnel and met some of the workers that were doing this work, what's the root cause? Why are these things breaking down? There's lots of moisture. Obviously, it's the wear and tear. There's a drainage system that's not working. So it's not just go out and fix the fastener. It's like, no, what is, let's come at this together at one time. We have a lot of equipment left over that we left sitting there. We actually sell a lot of our parts, leftover, steel and stuff. And it's sitting there. To me, it's money just sitting there. We got to get that out of there very quickly. Why don't we have a contractor following up right behind us, taking it? Eventually, a contractor does take it from us after we've moved it 2 or 3 times. It doesn't make sense. So the way I'm getting at these things is, again, not coming out with a 5-year plan, we have those things in place. It's really, again, the nuts and bolts of where we can start to make changes that will impact the customer, in the immediate term. Longer term, okay.
No, I'm going to follow up a minute ago.
Sure.
You said something from this stage, which is rare to hear somebody in charge say something like that. You're telling us that the problems are actually worse than we may think they are.
In terms of the way they've been presented and the way they've been framed, I think maybe it's just the way that I look at them, where how I would plan to solve, or how I plan to solve them is probably different than maybe they've been planned before. So from that perspective, they're not. I don't think, from my estimation, they have been framed correctly in the public dialogue with the board, and so that's what I intend to do.
The hard truths thing you've been talking about, the idea you actually need to know what they are before you can actually fix them and not try to cover it. Okay.
Right.
And I'm interrupting you, but you mentioned the 5-year kind of plan, the $5 billion 5-year plan. It seems that riders have heard about this, but they never see. They don't have that, like, well, what actually has happened? How are you going to show riders that there are improvements coming and make sure they notice those improvements?
Right. Again, I think that's an area where we haven't done a good job in framing that out. And to be frank, I've asked for that exact thing. Where are we on basically where we have to catch up with work that was, that we had put off over time? And then where are we on then what we call state of good repairs? Once you get it to a certain stage, how do you just keep maintaining it? And so I'm going to come out with basically what that is, where we are. Here's what we said we were going to do. Here's where we are. I mean, that's where I'm starting from. We have a backlog of work. What is it? And then once we get through that backlog, what is the plan going forward? And we have to be very clear to people what that is. And then we have to think strategically about how we address it. So I get into thinking about, we have an effort underway, to do that. Let's define it for people so they can understand it. But more importantly, let's think strategically how we address it. In my estimation, we've tried to make everyone happy. We've pretty much made everyone not happy with some of the approaches we've taken. I think when you look at other systems around the country, you have to make some hard decisions. But I think there's a discussion that needs to be had is what can we get, how much quicker can we get it? If we have a little bit of pain here, do we get things quicker? One of the things I hear constantly is, I won't use the weekend service because it's so inconsistent. Well, then maybe it's time to look at how we're doing the weekend service. Is there other things we can do? Same way with some of the midday. We do midday work, we come upon a problem, and guess what? It rolls right into the peak period. So I'm basically doing a total assessment of what we're doing, how we're doing that. And so that will be part of that going forward strategy. So it's not just something that there's this 5-year plan out there, but it's specifically talking about, this is what I need to do to get us back up to this state. And at that point, here's what you're going to see going forward.
And this is going to be trackable for the public. We're going to be able to see you in 2 months. We're going to have this done. In 1 year, this is going to be done, and we can judge you.
Yes, that's what we started on our website today, a customer report accounting system, basically, where I've laid out almost 50 items that we're starting to work on. Some of these we've already been, since I've been on board. Some were before I got on board, but a lot of them that we're just starting to do now. And so that's going to be something that some of these things will be updated weekly, monthly at a minimum, and then things will come and go. I only want to put things on there that I'm comfortable saying, yes, I know what we're doing, and this is the schedule we're going to do it on. And then let's judge ourselves against that. There'll always be issues with schedules. I get that, but I think it's important for us to be both transparent about it and then also turn up the accountability on us.
You mentioned fiscal management. There's only a finite amount of money that you have. So when you're trying to fix things, where does that come out? If you're talking about you want to maybe improve the 20 minutes you have to wait for a train on a Sunday, that has to come out of somewhere else. How do you find that money?
Well, the first and foremost is safety. That's going to be the first priority. So we have to do that. We have to bring, to get at some of these core issues, we have to bring just the basics up. So that's going to be sort of the next priority. And then we go, out from there. Anything that we touch, it gets very expensive very quickly, particularly if we're in the, and I'm speaking rail, there's a whole other side of the equation here with bus and metro access. But on the rail side, just given the physical limitations of a 2-track system, anytime we touch it, it gets very expensive in terms of just getting out there, the ability to get out there, and then the challenges we face with a 40-year-old system. that in some cases was not, it was just not kept up.
Interesting. The plan talked about safety. There's a couple of issues there. One is obviously the safety when you're on the train from no derailments or things like that. But we're also raised concerns about stabbings or shootings or rapes that have happened, sexual harassments that have happened on the metro. What is the plan there, and are you going to boost the number of officers on the trains?
Mm-hmm. So the personal security, personal safety issue, numerically, it's a very safe system. When you look at, it's 6 Part 1 crimes per million passengers. And if you look, in most communities, that's a very safe number. That means nothing to the person or to the community when they see one of these tragic events or drastic events that occurs. So what we've done, I've worked with the chief of police. Basically, we've sort of gone back and stepped back. All right, what is it that we can do differently than what we've done in the past? One of the first things that I noticed with our security is it tends to be almost invisible at times because of the uniforms. They blend into the crowd. And so we have an event where anything that occurs, it's even hard to see who's in charge. So that's one of the things, for instance, that a minor thing that we're doing. But more importantly, we're getting more people. We have a class that comes out in April. We have another one comes out in September for more people. We've realigned our resources to basically free up some things that our uniformed police officers were doing to put them out into the field. I've made it very clear to the chief that I want these officers on the platforms, popping into cars, popping out. Again, it's as much giving people the sense and the reassurance that it's under control. And the same way for our bus operators, same issue. We have issues, serious safety issues with some of our bus routes at different times of the day. We've created sort of a night watch program in effect, where we're having our officers come up to buses, stop, greet the operator, make sure everything's all right. We're also doing that with our central control system, where we're touching in with the bus operators. Because again, it's not just rail, but clearly rail is one of the biggest ones for us. But even when we do all that, it's a much larger issue, as we all know, community issue. One of the things that we've have reached out to is the schools, where we want to go out and meet, particularly with the students. And we're going to bring not only the police, but bring some of the operators and station managers like Ms. Odom and other people like that, so that we can make the connection with these students that it's just not it's not a power issue. It's this is your mother, this is your grandmother, this is your uncle, whatever it is, so they can start to relate and to try to take that in. So that's one of the things we want to do, or we started actually to do that. We've also worked very closely with the district. We have some of their personnel dealing with us on a day-to-day in our operations center, so we have direct communication. We do intel every day with the police and with the school system. If there's anything going on social media that we can all watch. We have an excellent closed-circuit television program now on our rail and our stations. The reality is, if you do something on our stations or platforms, or even at our bus stops, we're going to see it. And we have been basically any of these things we've been catching the people, and we've been getting them, but we want to prevent it. Is the key.
On that note, though, we're in a city with a lot of visible security. I'm just staying on this theme here. WMATA seems almost to be a soft target with almost no visible security. Oftentimes you walk into a metro station and there's one employee, there's one person there. I've been riding metro for 11 years, and I can probably count on one hand how many times I've seen officers inside of a tunnel. What is your specific plan to try to raise that, more than just changing the colors of the uniform?
No, it's to get more people out there. And again, have them policed differently. Again, have them proactively going down. A lot of times, again, being new, what I would see is police officers around the station kiosk. I want them down on the platforms. I want them popping into trains. That's a different policing strategy. So that's where I think it is. It's getting the police officers into the system, deeper into the system.
Gotcha. Back to fiscal management for a second. You had a memo recently that talked about no more travel and no more purchasing. I believe paper clips were even on your target list. Guessing that paper clip purchases are not going to solve your budget crisis. What is this an effort to do?
It's a checkbook effort. It's just like you have with your own personal checkbook. If you know for the month that you spent, you've allocated $500 for food and travel, and you're burning it much quicker than you thought, you got to start ratcheting it back. And that's all this is. It's a normal budgeting process that we have to manage the operating budget very tightly, so we monitor it, constantly. And that at this point, we just want to say, look, with the blizzard, particularly with the expenses that we incurred there, we've got to make sure we're ratcheting back and just thinking about all expenditures.
Let's talk about that blizzard for a second. A very bold choice to shut down the system for 2-3 days there. Can you give us a little more rationale of why shut down the entire system when underground, for example, it wasn't snowing?
Sure. It gets to the larger issue of if we are serious about safety, then we have to start making decisions based on safety. And across the entire agency, every employee I've met, they basically said that's the first time we've done this because someone understood the safety concerns that they had as operators and people. So that was, part of it is just a recognition that we cannot ignore the safety implications of a storm like that. If you recall, when we were preparing for that storm, our big concern was not only the snow and trapping vehicles in the snow and in the yards, but the winds. They were calling for 40-mile-an-hour winds, and we have we have a power source. We have very limited backup power, and if that power goes out, then we have people marooned in locations if we had kept just the underground open. The other part that we wanted to do, which I think it was the first time we had done it, which was basically we harbored the vehicles and a large portion of the vehicles in the tunnels. So that let us get back up in service much quicker. If you go back and look at some of the history of some of the snowstorms here, we had large mechanical issues after trying to go through snow because of the age of some of the equipment and where little the snow gets under the cars and would create other issues for us. We didn't have that this time, so we had that figured out. So anyway, it was something that I think was the right thing to do from a safety standpoint for our employees and for the customers. The worst thing we could have done is to have people out there, A, to get them to think they could travel in a storm like that, as we knew it at the time, and B, then have to go in and rescue them, because then we're pulling resources away from basically getting the system up and running. So that was the decision, and I think it was the right decision to make.
Staying with the safety issue, there are a lot of times you can get into a metro system and see a very crowded platform when you're at the games at the gallery place or something like that, but also there are issues when it comes down to construction inside of the stations where there's only a few feet between falling off the edge. Have you have any plans to try to address that for safety concerns, just passengers trying to walk through stations?
Right. In the short term, one of the things we're doing is we're basically we've created a new class of employees that were basically going to be working on platforms, particularly at the busier stations, just to deal with, in effect, crowding issues like that, and also using, obviously, the police to do that. The reality is, in some of our stations, the physical limitations are very tight, and it gets compounded when you have either a major event or you have some incident on the rail. So there's clearly that. So what we have to do is, one of the things that particularly for incidents, is we want to get people to understand before they get down into the station or before they go through into the mezzanine that basically there's an issue, and we start to hold people there. So we do that during some incidents, but I want to be much more proactive in that. One of the things we're looking at is putting rail information out on the pylons, at the street level. So we do have electric there. So that's one of the things that we're basically trying to figure out right now, and where we can tell people what's going on before they get down there, because that's part of the issue. You get people down there, and they're stuck. The other thing that we're doing is we have proposed doing a tap-in, tap-out. Some of the times people come into a station and there's an issue, and in effect they already paid, and they figure out, all right, I'm going to stay here because I already paid, and they wait it out, or they're frustrated because they paid and they have to, and they don't get the service they demand. So anyway, we're looking at a 15-minute grace period for that. So again, to help relieve some of that pressure, so people don't feel they have to stay. Okay, I get it. Something's going on here. Let me get out and do another plan without costing them.
I know I've done that myself. I understand that very much. Talk to me a little bit about those situations too. If I walk in and I see there's a 20-minute wait, I walk out and pull up my Uber app. Mm-hmm. Uber, Lyft, these other organizations are causing a competition for you. Is there a way to address that, or do you find it complementary to your system?
Yeah. I look at that. Let me talk about it at two levels. One is there are certain things that I have no control over. I have no control over the price of fuel. You know, if it's $1.60, $1.70, what can I do about that? And that's going to impact, you know, this Uber and Lyft and bike share or car sharing. All those things impact us. That is not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is let us provide the best service we can within that context. You know, so that's where we should be focusing, not worrying about what's, you know, some of these things that I have no control over. So that's at the one level. At the other level is thinking about those as part of an overall transportation plan for the region. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's not an either or car, next car, or any of that. To me, it's all part of a system. So we should think of it as a system and you know, gear towards that. Then are there opportunities to use that? You know, are there other things we could be doing that are more efficient by tapping into those resources and not figuring out ways to try to beat them? So it's a little different, maybe a little different philosophy with that.
In fact, I think I recently read that was a Giant with Peapod is going to deliver groceries now to some metro stations,
right,
so
exactly.
people can pick up there on the way home.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of hinted at this, but does Metro's problem and a lot of the issues it faced reflect the larger state of the country's infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure? Are we essentially an example of what's going wrong right now when it comes to transportation funding and infrastructure?
I think, yeah, a lot of the same trends that you see across the country, whether it's transit, highway, I mean, you name it. I mean, you look at any of the industry groups, and they have a laundry list of needs that haven't been met, have been sort of kicked down the road, and at some point they come back to haunt us. I mean, you look at manhole covers blowing up in the air. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of infrastructure things that have been ignored that need to be fixed, and so that's a national debate. It's also a regional one for us.
Speaking of regional, the idea of a dedicated tax has been pushed for a very long time with little interest in Virginia and Maryland. Is there any way that you think you will ever see a dedicated tax for the metro system?
I think that the way that I view the system is we are in a region that is competing globally. I mean, that's what we are. And the metro is just one of the tools to help this region compete globally. And so unless we start to think in those terms, it puts us in a very difficult position to compete. So what that means is if we fund on a local level, then you're going to think much more locally. If you fund in a regional level, you tend to think more regional. And you set the governance structure around that, and you start to have an understanding of what you're trying to do as a region. So from that perspective, I think it is important. If you look at the major transit properties around this country, I think we're the only one that does not have some sort of regional mechanism like that. It provides the stability and the certainty in budgeting rather than an annual budgeting thing that we go through. Now, we do reach agreement for some longer term agreements, but by and large, again, across the country, the reason that you see that is because these are very large, complex, expensive systems to maintain and operate, and unless you have that, it makes it very difficult.
In terms, relatively terms, Metro is pretty young compared to a lot of the other systems out there in the United States and in Europe. Are there lessons you can learn, for example, from some of the systems in Europe that have been operating for a very long time and don't seem to have as many of the issues that we face here in Washington?
Well, I mean, I think to compare to Europe is a little, we look at transit in this country a little bit differently than, some other places, both in Europe and Asia. So I think that comparison's a little tough. Yes, there are definitely lessons to be learned. I mean, the smart card is in effect one of those, building off what the Oyster did in London, for instance. So I think there's lots of things we can do that we can learn from them. But I think just particularly the funding and the public policy decisions in both Europe and in some of the Asian countries, they're not quite applicable here. I think clearly we can learn from other major systems in the country. My experience has been, every one of those systems have their issues, and I'm sure that if you look a little bit deeper, they have very similar issues that they have to go through. We all do because, again, the nature of the beast. But I think if we get at some of these core issues, we can start to solve. We should be, at a minimum, the best transit system in the U.S. both in terms of its age, in terms of its meaning to this economy, what it means to the nation as the nation's transit system. I mean, we should definitely be there, for sure. As we reach to meet European and/or Asian sort of models, that's a little bit further down the road.
Why aren't we the best one in the United States?
I think some of it is because we had a new system and we focused on the newness and maybe not some of the aging of it. We had a capital construction mentality, I believe, as an agency over the years. We've now moved into, obviously, except for the Silver Line, but we moved into a DPW type of environment, a Department of Public Works environment, where basically, you're taking care of the basics. And that's a shift for the agency.
Some questions from the audience. This questioner wants to know, there are many examples of wonderful Metro customer service representatives, but there's often operators who abandon their trains or their station, and there's no one there to help. Does Metro have a customer service problem?
I have seen just some fantastic customer service from people that have no idea who I am, or they don't even know I was there. So they, by and large, do very well. Do they have issues? Yes. Have we brought the line employees into the solutions? No. And that's exactly what I talked about earlier. What I'm trying to build is at the staff level, particularly at the operation, the frontline people level, is the pride in the system. I want them, and I've said this, we have a class of new employees that come in every 2 weeks, and Dan, who runs that, is here. And the thing I say to all those employees is that what I want you to do is when you go out to watch a Caps game or whatever, if someone asks you, where do you work, I want you to be able to say Metro, and they think, oh, that's cool, and B, you're proud to do it. So that means we've got a lot of work to do that. But I think that is something, if you ask someone where they work and they say Under Armour, for instance, you may have a whole different view of them, and they may say it a different way. And I know we can get there. It's something that we did at BWI. I think if you ask anyone, if they say BWI, they're going to feel proud about it, and you're going to think positive about it. So that's the same goal I have here, but it starts with the line employees. That means a lot of work with our managers to understand that, to buy into that. It means working in the construct of our, how we operate in terms of both the unionization, the labor, making sure, there's rules that we abide by there, but we got to make sure that, but the goal here is to be proud in the system.
Can you do that without raising salaries? That's usually one thing that instills some happiness in a workforce.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's always going to be the issue. But I think if you treat people with respect, it goes an awful long way, is my experience. They get it. I mean, that sometimes the money's not always going to be there. I think that we have. I mean, these are great jobs. There's no doubt about it. That the employees have great jobs. But more importantly, it's building that relationship with the frontline employees, that we're in this together, that we're thinking of you. So like, for instance, when I make a decision on blizzards, I'm thinking of them, not just, okay, I've got to try to do this because that's what other people say I should be doing. It really is thinking about them at the same time.
Speaking of that, you've had some big decisions you've had to make so far, and you've been pretty decisive in your 3 months as the GM. From the snowstorm to the police expansion, others. How do you approach decision making? Is this a group effort? Do you bring everyone together? Is this you saying, we have to do this?
It's, right now, it's probably a little bit heavy-handed on my part. I just came out with a new organizational structure, and I am recruiting for a number of those positions. My experience, though, eventually is I get a sort of tight team that basically is thinking strategically about the agency all the time, is what I want. And then I manage more on a matrix style, which is, I get out and want all of my, particularly my managers, to do that. One of the things that I found at the agency is quite a bit of silos and a lot of turf issues. So with the new organizational structure, I'm basically tearing that down. So the people that work for me directly, that are my direct reports, and all the people under them are at will, and they will understand that what that means is that either they act as a team or they're not on the team.
One of the questioners wants to know what has been your worst Metro fiasco as a passenger?
Actually, one of the the worst was, and it wasn't, it was understandable. We had an issue, and it was at Union Station. I had a breakfast meeting there early, and then I caught the train down. And it was kind of interesting because I had a 9 o'clock back at headquarters, and it was on customer service. And when I was there was a number of issues we were dealing with, but I could not find the people that were managing it. I did not get the sense of urgency of what we were dealing with. And so when I got back to the meeting, when I looked at the pages I was getting, it was, we had these train delays and, there's these things going on, but that was it. So I sort of lost it a little bit. And then, but I think they started to understand that, they have been over the years, a little dulled to some of the issues, I think. So I've got to bring that into focus, that this is not acceptable, that we need to be proactive when things occur and not just think, okay, well, I've got the trains and they're moving back. It's all the customer experience part of it, which I did not see. I was lucky enough to be recognized by a number of customers, and I was informing them of what was going on. So that was probably one that sticks in my mind as one that kind of got to me a little bit.
You want to tell me your best experience just to counterweight that?
Oh, best. I mean, I have had so many. There's one gentleman that's a train operator that's just fantastic and providing information. In fact, I asked him to come down to the office and we get to meet him. So that's fantastic. I've seen our police do just tremendous work. Unfortunately, we had a terrible incident not too long ago on the tracks with an individual, and it was a Friday night, and it was a 3-hour ordeal. And guess what? No one on that line that was dealing with that issue, most of them were not working. I mean, they were off, and this wasn't how they were planning to spend their Friday night. But they handled a very complex and tragic incident with just utmost professionalism in dealing with the situation, and also trying to get out to the customers so they understood what was going on, and then rebuilding the service as quickly as they can. So to see that, again, I'm very thrilled with the passion I see in the people. I think it needs to be harnessed. I think it needs to be directed. I think it needs to be brought out, but it's definitely there.
You referenced crime problems a few minutes ago, and you seem to be talking a little bit more about transparency with the Metro system. Currently, though, information about these crimes, arrests and prosecution of crimes on Metro is currently not available publicly. Will you make it publicly available going forward?
Yeah, we will make public whatever we have. I mean, that's, it's a little bit more complex than just what we control of this, particularly with youth crime. There's all kinds of rules that I'm still learning about, in the region. But from what we do, we will be as open as we can. If it jeopardizes an investigation or a method that we're using, we're not going to be open about that.
With the same question about transparency, will WMATA make public the terms of real estate transactions after they're finalized and approved? Other public agencies do this across the country.
Again, I see no reason not to.
And I'm just getting as many promises as I can from you right now. When will WMATA join some of the other transit agencies and post all procurement awards, all bidders and responders, and the value of those bids on your website?
Again, I don't see any problem in doing that.
I think you're making the crowd very happy. This questioner wants to know, why does it take so long to replace broken escalators? And I think we've seen stories of, especially in some places like Wheaton or DuPont Circle, and why do they break so often?
Yeah, well, let me touch on the why part first. We actually have a lab where we have the mock-ups basically of the escalators and the two different types of elevators we have. One of the things I learned, particularly with the escalators, is a lot of times what you see is, now from a customer perspective, it's broken. It's a breakdown. But the reality is these are very complex systems that are designed from a safety standpoint. So and I'm not even going to tell you what you can do, but there are certain things that if you do certain things on those escalators, they will stop automatically. And it deals with steps, it deals with rails, and deals with some other things. So just in normal usage, it can happen pretty quickly. And what happens is it shuts down automatically as it's supposed to do. So we have, station managers have some ability to investigate, but the reality is you have to make sure it's safe. So that means you take a technician out. So we try to keep technicians in effect in an emergency response condition so they can do that. So a lot of times what you'll see with a stopped escalator is that very issue. There's a whole nother set of escalator issues where we literally have to replace escalators. That gets to be quite a challenge if you have limited access to a station, because we have to think about, all right, how do we get people out of there if an emergency occurs? So that's how they have to think about how they stage these things. In terms of rehabilitation of escalators, it's the same issue. We try to maintain them, we replace the basics, and then every now and then, or every few years, we have to basically do a whole rehab on them. So, but our breakdown rate is in the 90s, we're performing in the 90 percentile, 92 and 93 percentile. The reality is, if an escalator is broken down and it's your escalator, they're all broken. But if you look at any of our stations, you may be looking at a dozen escalators in that one station that you may, as a customer, never think about, but there's escalators all over the place there, but the one that you hit is broke, and so it's broke, and we get it. But from the percentage standpoint, they actually have done a very good job. But we're going to continue that. We're going to continue to try to do that better, for sure.
Continuing with a little bit of the transparency and openness part, to my knowledge, Metro has not released the number or amount of settlements paid out for injuries or death that have occurred in the system. Will you release that information, or do you know offhand how much has Metro paid?
I don't. I just don't know that issue enough to commit to that one. I just don't know what the legal ramifications of all that are. I just don't. I don't want to commit on that one.
Okay. Changing subjects a little bit. Recently, we learned that a effort with the major phone carriers to plug the system with more cell service towers and antennas fell through. Now Metro is going to fund that itself. Why was that decision made, and why did it take this long to?
Sure. Well, again, I walk in as a 10-year history of this thing. But the reality is it's not a cell phone issue for us. It's a radio issue. So we have a major radio system, both above ground and below ground, that basically is used for emergencies and the 700 megahertz system. We have to replace that because the FCC says we have to get off the band that we're on. So we have roughly a $350 million project to replace our entire radio system, above ground, below ground, new radios, new cabling, new antennas. So as part of that, as we're in the tunnels, hanging our cables for our radio needs, we basically have struck a deal with the carriers to hang their cable. A few years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, it was flipped. There was a business reason for them to do that. That business reason has pretty much dried up. You used to pay by the minute. You don't pay by the minute anymore, all right? So now, and the other thing is, as they tried to do it, what they found is it's a very complex environment to work in, because basically you're competing for space to get track space, because you're literally hanging these cables on the walls, on the tunnel walls, above third rail. You're moving utilities and/or signage on those things, and you have to do this in a very small window of time, or the customer pays in terms of what we can provide. So basically what the arrangement we have now is we have this roughly $350 million project, 125 million or so is in the tunnel portion of it. Of that is a subset that deals with the cell phone portion of it. So what we've done is struck a deal where they give us some cash and they give us some materials in kind. So we're going to be doing it as we're doing our radio. So it sort of flipped the approach.
Do you see that as a safety issue as well? Is it a safety issue for people not to be able to use their phones when they're on the train?
Yes, definitely. It's at a minimum, it's a perceived safety issue, because if something happens down there, you want to be able to have access. So I get it. That's very understandable. So yes, we want it from that perspective. I think the customer would like just to have it, for sure. You see it in the stations where we do have it. This is not anything unique to Metro. This is an issue for any transit system around the country, particularly the major systems. It's very expensive, and it has a major impact on the system when you put these things in, and then you compound it with our system. With only a 2-track system, you're taking out one of the tracks to do it.
Let's talk a bit about the phone app. The ability for riders to be able to tell how long until a bus is coming, how long until a train's coming, or if there's a backload at a Union Station, they know that they should maybe walk to the other side to another train. What efforts are you making there to make that information available to app developers?
Sure. Apparently we had, for some reason, we weren't sharing as much information as we had. So we've changed that about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Be frank, I hadn't gotten down to that level. And when I discovered and learned a little bit more about it, I said, well, that's ridiculous. We should be able to share whatever information we have in terms of particularly train movement. The reality is, though, we don't have excellent information on that. It's based on like maybe a 10, 15-year-old technology of how we've been trying to track trains. So you even see that on the PIDs, the information displays that we have. So you might see something that says it's 3 minutes. Well, it's measuring where it was in this one gap, and it's estimating what it'll take to get there. It doesn't understand what's happened between here and there. So we have to create a system that does that. So we need to do that on our own. So we're going to do that on our own. At the same time, we want to be able to open up as much of the technology to third-party developers to do this. One of the things that I've said repeatedly is for us to try to catch up in some of these areas, whether it's social media, in some of these technology areas, for us as an agency to get there is, we will always be behind. We just don't have that, that capability. It's not our core mission. It supports our mission, but, it's not our core. Why don't we let private sector people, other people, creative people, do that? And let's figure out ways to do that. So we are doing that across the board. We've reached out to Greater Washington, for instance, to help us think things like that. People, again, there's a lot of smart people in this area that will know much more than we will ever know in that area.
A lot of these things you've talked about today, and your bullet points you started with today, safety, reliability, and fiscal management, correct? Mm-hmm. Those things cost money. So that gets to the third thing of fiscal management. Where are you going to find the money for better technology for tracking buses, the fixing elevators so they're not breaking as much, adding security and making safety important? How do you do that?
Well, first we have to manage more efficiently. I think there's a lot of things we can pick up by managing a little differently than we managed before. So I think there's definitely efficiencies there. I think there's some redundancy in what we do, and we need to make some changes there. We just have some things that are legacy that we just don't need anymore. So we'll have to address all those. So that frees up some dollars to work smarter. I think in general we can achieve more, but we need to continue to work with both our federal partners and our jurisdictions to basically address those issues and make hard decisions. But my job is to give them clear, understanding of what we're up against, and now where do you want to chip away at?
Does the FTA oversight, how much does that affect what you're trying to do, or does that change what you're trying to do now that you have different federal oversight?
No, it's, I welcome oversight. I think we have to make sure it is as efficient as possible. I think we have to, one of my concerns is we tend to be very focused on process and not the product. So one of the things we did online today is we outlined 732, I think it is, literally actions that we're taking, because that's more important to me is what physically are we doing to get the system safer and not sort of the compliance part of the issue. Obviously we have to meet the compliance, but we seem to be spending a lot of time and energy on the process versus what are we doing to change the product. So my focus is more on that. I think obviously as the new Metropolitan Safety Commission gets set up, I think that's great. Again, I think those are things that we should have. The sooner that is done in a definitive way, the better.
There's a questioner wants to know about what can be done about the bad behavior by some of the riders on Metro trains, being from noise, food, blocking the exit, people put their feet up on the chairs. Is there an effort that maybe be done with a courtesy campaign, or is there a culture problem you see with the riding trains that needs to be reversed?
I don't know. I've been to movies, I've been to malls, and I've experienced all kinds of things in a lot of public environments. So I think we reflect that no differently than other public environments. So yes, we can make sure that we try to do that, that we project a certain decorum that we would like to have in the system, but it's a big community.
You talked earlier about all the stakeholders you visited with, news outlets, civic groups, politicians in the DC area. But this question I want to know, you've only spent about 10 minutes of WMATA's Riders Advisory Council. This is a 21-member group of riders representing the ridership of each district in Metro's service area. When do you expect to spend more time with this group, and how do you see their influence as ridership representatives during your time as general manager?
No, they're right. I did meet with them early when I just came on board. basically I've got to spend some time with them. I know that, and I basically said that at the time that I need to get back and really work with them. I think now where I basically remember at the beginning 2 months or so, I was really in the sort of absorption stage, and I was trying to take in as much. So now I can start to talk about more what we're doing. So I think I can get more engaged with groups like that. So look forward to do it. They offer excellent perspective. Now they do provide a perspective to the board, myself, but more importantly to the board, and it's one of their committees in effect. So that's important for the board to have some direct connection with some of the riders, and that's what that does.
Gotcha. A questioner wants to know, the Blue Line riders have been complaining seemingly nonstop since the introduction of the Silver Line and the Rush Plus changes that reduced the number of Blue Line trains through the Roslyn switch. That happened 2012. So 4 years later, these riders are crammed, this questioner says, onto 6-car trains at 12-minute headways while paying peak fares. How do you plan to address this inequity in the long term and the immediate?
Sure. Do you want me to just talk to Martin directly? Or
Yeah.
Nice. No, I mean, the reality is, those decisions, were made a dozen years ago by the local governments. They understood that, you have a tunnel that, or a portion of the system that can handle roughly 26 trains per hour. So decisions were made, a decade ago that that's what they would do. We have to, again, where I need to focus on is making sure that what we put out there operates. That we put it out at the right numbers in the morning, at PM peak particularly, and that once it's out there, it's reliable. So I think that starts to solve some of those issues. I can't undo the construct of that deal because of the limitations. That's, again, something that was settled, I think, quite a while ago. So it is the nature of what we have with a very constrained system at that point.
You've had declining readership for many years, it seems, and you've got some bullet points here. You're talking about what you'd like to do to change that, but will the improvements in safety, reliability, and fiscal management mean you can increase the number of people using it, or does it have to be a wholesale change in how the system operates?
I think it definitely has to be, we have to get the basics right. But I have reached out actually to Chuck Bean at WashCog to take a broader look at some of those trends, what's going on. Clearly, you can point to some of the issues that we have, but this is a complex region. I mean, you hit on some of the things that are impacting that. So I think when we look a little bit harder at the numbers, some of the core routes and some of the areas where we have joint development, the numbers are actually up. Some of the longer haul routes tend to be down. So there's lots of dynamic going on there. So I've reached out to WashCog to say, help us think this through and think about all these other aspects of it, whether it's land use, whether it's different business, whether you can telework, not telework, all those things have to be thought of this. So that we can start to think differently about what we provide. Because if we continue to try to provide a system, from a 70s and 80s mentality, then we're just, we're wasting dollars and time.
We're almost out of time. I wanted to end with a few notes, and then I have a couple last questions, if that's okay. Before I ask the final questions, a quick reminder, the National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists, and we fight for a free press worldwide. For more information about the club, please visit our website at press.org. Once again, that's press.org. I would also like to remind you about some upcoming programs. Tomorrow, a Republican entrepreneur turned philanthropist, Jay Faison, founder and chief of ClearPath, a new nonprofit foundation dedicated to finding and promoting conservative clean energy policies, will outline the organization's conservative approach. 1 week from today, we'll host documentarian Ken Burns and Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. to discuss race in America. Also that night, March 14, the National Press Club will be honored to welcome home Jason Rezaian, a Washington Post journalist imprisoned unjustly in Iran as a political hostage for 545 days. Jason will be with us that night a week from today. Now, I'd like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club mug, but I also like to remind you not to use this on the Metro system to drink anymore.
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
We've talked earlier about a lot of the issues coming with Metro and the bus system and your efforts to address those. Recently, DC started running its streetcar after many years and many failed promises of when it would start running. $200 million, I believe, was the effort. What are your thoughts on the management of the DC streetcar, and will you be able to use Metro fare passes when they eventually, so it's all integrated in some form?
Leif Dormsjo is just doing a fantastic job in running that system. I mentioned he's a board member too, I think. No, he's done a very good job, and I know his team has, to get that up running. And I think they did the same approach that we're applying, is we're not going to put out something out there until we know it's safe and it's reliable. And that's basically what I think you just saw play out there. So that's very good. We'll discuss later on the fare issue with the district.
Okay, but will it be integrated? Do you plan to try to make it integrated?
We'll work with them to see what makes the most sense once they decide to start to charge.
Okay. And I guess for my last question, we'll end a little bit early today, but you've moved from Baltimore now here to Washington. We have some sports teams that are competing, so I'd like to get you on the record. Are you now a Redskins and a Nationals fan?
As I mentioned to one of my board members a while ago when he asked me the same question, you have a great hockey team and a great basketball team down here.
I guess I could press you a little more, but I also know your wife is sitting right there, and she's from Baltimore County, so I will be very careful. Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. I appreciate that. I'd like to thank the National Press Club staff, including our Journalism Institute staff and Broadcast Center, for organizing today's luncheon. If you'd like a copy of today's program or to learn more about the National Press Club, go to our website, press.org. Thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.